Hey, everybody, welcome to a new episode of Ecosystem Academy. I'm Dave Taylor. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Impartner, a company that does platforms and solutions to help enable ecosystems. And I'm really excited to be joined today again by Kate Vitasek from the University of Tennessee and from Vested. Kate, you started Vested specifically to help up-level that role of partnering, which is awesome. How's that going? That's going well?
We continue to have more and more people be enlightened that win-win relationships really work. We just had a new case study come out this month, EY and ISS. ISS is a large facilities management company based out of Denmark. They have about 400,000 people.
Wow.
And IBM and Securitas did a podcast earlier last month. So every year we get more and more people. So it's super exciting. When you start with a little idea and you've got one company that believes in what you're teaching, and then it goes to 2, and then it goes to 4, and then 8. So it's fun to see the Vested movement grow.
Always a good sign that you've kind of struck the vein on something like that. That's very cool. So, Kate, I've seen you publish on and have a presence on CNN, Bloomberg, Harvard Business Review, and I noticed that you were named one of the fabulous 50 plus one at World Trade Magazine. I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up. It says it's a list of the most influential people in global commerce. That's pretty cool.
It is cool. It is cool. So it was a surprise to be listed on that. So it's a little old now, a little outdated, but super fun to be recognized for what you're working on.
All right, that's cool. I've seen your career at P&G, at Microsoft, at Accenture, and then the vested work that you've been doing. But I think perhaps the biggest challenge you've got is coming up on December 21st when University of Tennessee tackles Ohio State in the bowl game. Is that a big deal?
That is a big deal. We got sniffed out of the playoffs last year, and tripped up and didn't win our last game, so we didn't get to go. And now the game is changing and how they do playoffs, so it's gonna be super fun. I mean, everyone in there could win. So
listen, I don't want to upset you at the beginning of this dialogue, but I am a Buckeyes fan. I'm going to cook the little Buckeyes candy cookies. So don't get mad at me. Hey, you've published a bunch of books. I see them on the wall back behind you. The one that we are excited to talk a little bit about today is this Contracting in the New Economy. We did offer registrants. The first 10 registrants, we're going to send a copy of the book to. I've got your names here. Somebody from TraceLink and Rapid7 and Scality and Ellucian and Darktrace, etc. If we have your contact information, we will get these books out to you. If you haven't heard from us, congratulating you on the win, please drop us a note, and we'd love to make sure you get a copy of these books. I told Kate that we would offer them to you signed, but not necessarily signed by her. I signed a bunch of them this morning. So no, I'm just kidding. That would be terrible. Hey, just as a quick kind of refresher course on this, Impartner got into this engagement with Kate and into kind of the concept of up-leveling the role of relationships because we see some changes going on in the market. Over the last few years, there's been a dramatic shift into collaborative selling and collaborating with a broader number of companies on the global scale. And I thought that I would mention, just as an example of that, Impartner does software to enable a lot of this. We have a technology called deal registration, and deal registration 5-7 years ago was like a walled garden. It was one of our partners saying, I've got a deal and I want to build a wall around that so that nobody can touch this deal but me. These days, our deal reg stuff is more like an invitation to cooperate. It's like, hey, I've got this deal, but I could sure use some help in how we move this forward. And it really has been kind of a shift for us in how we've seen that. The thing I love about that is it does kind of tee up the fact that that ecosystems are really primed to disrupt the traditional kind of business as usual models. Kate, am I saying that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, instead of, 1 + 1 = 2, we can actually create more value by leaning into those relationships. 1 + 1 = 11, and then you bring in someone else. And it really is a multiplier effect when you get it right. The problem is sometimes it's not so easy to get right.
Why is it not? What are the biggest challenges?
Well, we say strategic partnership, and then we turn around and don't act or contract as strategic partners. One of my favorite things to pick on is the termination for convenience. You are so strategic, Dave. I just can't wait to work with you, but I have a 30-day term of convenience. So the relationship, we say these relationships are important, but then we don't contract for the strategic nature of these relationships. We turn around and we're very transactional in how we deal with them.
Yeah, I love that. The next book, in the next session that we do together, we'll talk a little bit more about this one, Vested, and how they redefine what the term winning means in kind of the new world of relationships. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that in a minute, about how that strategic partnership has changed. So Impartner has been in the kind of partnering space for so long. We watch pretty carefully, and we've got this slide with some Amazon headlines, but we see this change so dramatically. Business has become much more global than ever. Some of the analyst community talk about how there's 28 touch points in any deal. To get a deal into the end zone. I shouldn't use the end zone because it's a football, and y'all are going to probably lose to Ohio State, but to get a deal into the end zone, it takes 28 people, or 28 business partners to kind of each add value as it moves. And we see that happening more and more on a global scale. There's been more and more, outsourcing about that. So we look at that and we think there's got to be processes that we can bring to this, or that we can suggest to people to bring to this, that allows you to create value, but still be lean and agile and quick moving. You talk about the new economy. Is this what you mean by the new economy?
Yeah, I mean, think about the way we've contracted for decades. Actually, I would even stretch it to a couple hundred years. Adam Smith, really was the father of modern economics, and capitalism is built on a very highly transactional way of working. So I give you $1, you give me a unit of service. I trade you a loaf of bread, you trade me for a wheel for my cart. And so we've built up this transactional ways of working. And as we got into really the 80s and the 90s, and this is where the book, The World is Flat, comes in, people started to shift out, and, their partners now were all over the world. And so our supply chains were more outsourced. And so, I think about it. Here's some interesting statistics. Dave, did you know that 83% of all companies outsource some form of their logistics, right? 50% outsource some form of their facilities and real estate management.
Wow.
And so the genie's out of the bottle. And then, we have this pressure to be more lean and agile and flexible and fast. And the world is changing. We've got AI. So all of this change, and with the fact that we have multiple partners, as you said, 28 touch points just to get a deal across, is putting pressure on people. I think their heads are exploding. I look at these organizations that come to us, and I'm sure the folks that are in the audience, sometimes they just feel this pressure that, what do we do tomorrow? I'm just trying to get today done. And this is really the premise of what we wanted to lean into in our work. We'd seen these relationships where organizations were saying, let's slow down and build a relationship that is based on a flexible framework that embraces change. Instead of trying to fight it and create these transactional agreements that don't align with where business is happening, let's create a relational contract, a framework, a flexible contract framework that embraces the relationship and allows us to navigate the dynamic world of business. And not only that, allows us to lean into this relationship and make investments in a world of unknown, right?
Yeah.
Shared risk, shared reward. So we have to embrace, we don't have to. We can bury our head in the sand, right? But the best organizations are saying what got us there isn't going to get us there going forward. And so, is there a better way to contract? And that's really what the premise is on the book, Contracting in the New Economy, and using relational contracts to boost trust and collaboration with our trading partners.
The phrase that I've heard you use and that I saw in the book was that really the business in the new economy has changed. Contracts have not kept up. They've really been left behind. And Kate, as I was reading that, what came into my mind is that poem by Robert Frost, "Mending a Wall." So this unnamed farmer is walking along the wall, and his neighbor on the other side is walking along, and they're fixing the wall. And the unnamed farmer says, "There's something in nature that doesn't love a wall." But his friend across the fence is saying, "Good walls make good neighbors." And I'm thinking that there's a little bit of that, in my thinking. I've always had this sense that, strong contracts make good business relationships, but at the same time, they have to be built with the concept that you're talking about of this flexible framework that allows clearly defined relationship goals and objectives, but the ability to shift and adjust as you move, because nothing is clear cut in the new economy.
That's absolutely right. And that's where we wanted to lean into the concept of a formal relational contract, because you still need these contracts, but we have to change the nature of them where they're building the relationships. As you mentioned, I mean, this is really the premise. The problem was the world has changed, but contracts have not, right? We live in a dynamic world. Relationships matter. We know this. Lots of work has been done on the concept of trust and trust in relationships. One would actually argue we're in a trust deficit. If you look at some of the Edelman scores and different things, the trust in our societies are eroding. And to make matters worse, the pandemic highlighted this, because when we had these trading partner relationships, when it was just like you or me, us versus you, and there's a shortage of supplies, who's going to get those supplies?
Yeah.
It was the companies that had the best relationship. Dave, if I have a shortage, if you're a not so nice Ohio State fan, why would I support you? Right? I'm going to go and really lean in a world of scarce assets, or where we need fast movers. I'm going to lean into those that I trust.
Yeah.
And so contracts can help us, or they can hurt us. And this is where we were saying so many of the contracts today are designed as adversarial, us versus them, and they put up these walls. So we still need a contract, but we need to make it not so adversarial in nature, but coming together to build those relationships.
Yeah. I love the thought of finding that partner that you have a trust relationship with, and knowing that you can kind of walk into any situation, and whether you know what the situation is going to be and what the outcome you're driving at or not is, you've got somebody by your side or several people surrounding you that you have a relationship with of trust. I thought that I would share just real briefly. 25 years ago, probably before most of the audience was born, but 25 years ago, I was invited into a meeting at a company that I was at, and we were being sold. And there was going to be a lot of equity traded for cash, and some people were going to make a lot of money, and it was looking increasingly to me like the people that were going to make the most money were the investors and not the employees. But I was invited into this meeting, and please forgive my rough language on this one, but one of the board members said this exact quote, and I've never forgotten. He said, in a transaction like this, there's going to be a lot of screwing going on, and that's okay as long as we're the ones doing the screwing. And I thought about that, and I thought, now, hey, is that the type of business relationship that you want to have with people? Not everybody's going to win. And I'm okay with that as long as I'm one of the ones that does. That's a terrible way of thinking about a business relationship.
Yeah, and it's very short term in nature, right? So, yeah, you will win in the short term, but then you have a reputation that people don't want to work with you anymore. And when you need trading partners to get something done, that's not the reputation that you want. And our contracts are building these walls. Now, does that mean we throw out contracts? No, absolutely not. Right? We need contracts. We just need them to be built for today's economy versus yesterday's economy. Right?
Yeah, you've done that comparison of a relational contract versus transactional. Walk us through that a little bit, just because I want to understand that.
Well, before I get into the comparison, I really want to just anchor in what is it we're teaching? What is the premise? And before the book, Contracting the New Economy, I teamed with a Swedish attorney, David Friedlinger, and Oliver Hart, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist at Harvard University, teaches contract theory. And so you have this contract economist, contract theorist, a practicing lawyer, and a supply chain geek. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a supply chain person. How do we get things to work? And what we had started to realize is that we were tackling this problem from different angles, right? So I was trying to see how you got trading partners to work. Oliver's looking at the math associated with the theory and the math behind contracts. And David is trying to wrestle with the actual, written words on the page. And so we teamed and wrote a white paper, which then turned into a Harvard Business Review article called The New Approach to Contracts. And in that, we really wanted to put the concept of a formal relational contract. So it's not this handshake deal, right? It's not this rigid adversarial contract. Is kind of something in the middle. So a formal relational contract is a legally enforceable written contract. So yes, we want to have the wall up between the companies. We like walls. We like contracts. However, it's going to change the nature. It's not going to be this adversarial wall. It's going to be more of a contract that's going to seek to bring us together and create that flexibility. So we're putting the commercial partnership. So Dave, when I say you're a strategic partner, I want to lean into that, right? I don't want to say you're a strategic partner and then turn around and have a 60-day termination for convenience where I get to screw you. Oh, sorry, business happened. I know you invested a ton of money, but I'm the one who's doing the screwing here, just like you said, right? So we want to put the partnership first over the contractual terms. And so the contractual terms need to support the intent of the partnership, not compete with them. The intent is what we're actually pulling into that contract. And more importantly, it is a flexible contract framework because, Dave, as you know, business happens, right? The pandemic taught us that. And so the best relationships that we were seeing in our research, when business happened, they leaned into the relationship instead of saying, hey, you know what? I can just let you go, right? Sorry, termination for convenience, or sorry, I don't have to give you uphold what I'm shipping to you. I'm going to give it to the person that I really like. So we want a flexible contract framework that embraces business change. And in order to do that, we're going to pull in social norms and defined objectives. So we're going to create a shared vision, common goals, social norms, which we call guiding principles. And so the contract is going to put that relationship front and center, and it's going to prioritize that relationship and continuous alignment of interest. When business happens, we're going to really protect each other and come together, instead of saying, contract allows me to screw you, right? So it's a relationship. The relationship's front and center, but it's still a contract.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your passion on this. I think it's very, very cool. I still am surprised, in a good way, amazed that a Nobel Prize in economic sciences would go to somebody writing in this space. I mean, that more than anything, that really underscores, the gravity of the topic. I mean, this really, I mean, if anything, that's kind of an arrow pointing, big neon flashing arrow pointing at this, saying, you really, as a company, you really need to focus on these type of relational contracts and the type of trust and shared vision relationships that you're building with people in your ecosystem. And I think that I think, you know, Oliver winning that, or I should probably say Dr. Hart winning that, you know, that Nobel Prize, I think really kind of underscores that topic.
Yeah. Now, to be in full disclosure, he won his Nobel Prize before we started working on this, but his theories were going down this path, right?
Yeah.
So he had studied lock-in and shading, and from an economic theory perspective, when we have a contract that sets a reference point and it opens the door for me to screw you, then we just don't give it our best. So we're not optimizing for the economics of that partnership. Instead, we're still, you know, optimizing for us, and we're holding back. And the best results come when our group, you know, everyone in the group does what's best for himself and the group. So how do we really not just say cooperation and collaboration, but start to bring our contract terms up to speed with the intent? And I mean, that's really the disconnect. We have an intent and our contract isn't aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, 2024 ended strong. 2025 is looking like it's going to be, you know, a good, strong year in kind of the tech space economy. But there have been a couple years in a row now where things have been a little bit tougher, you know, coming out of COVID and trying to reestablish business. And I've seen a lot of companies struggling with kind of big strategic processes. You know, they want to do digital transformation. They want to build out an ecosystem and stuff. How does relational contracting, you know, either compete with those or enhance these other big, you know, corporate strategies that people are working on? Is it something that you say to people, no, look, get this done first and it makes everything else easier? Or do we say, hey, complete your company's journey in digital transformation, and when you get to a good stopping point, you might want to think about revising the way you partner? I mean, how do you position that to companies?
Well, that's a really good point. So, you know, if you can get there on your own, I like to use an analogy of going to Mount Everest. So, Dave, if you can do your digital transformation all by yourself, go ahead and climb that Mount Everest, right? But most of the time, we can't do that ourselves. We need a partner or partners. And this is where the idea of a relational contract comes in, because I'm not contracting for you just to, you know, you wouldn't show up at the bottom of Mount Everest with a big RFP and tell your expert how to do the work. I call that the outsourcing paradox, or the partner paradox, right? So you are the expert and I need you to be my Sherpa, and yet I'm going to tell you how to do the work. That's craziness, right? So we have to lean into these experts. Now, P&G has 80,000 suppliers. They can't all be strategic, but the ones that are need to be shifting to these more and embracing more relational contracting concepts. So let's go ahead and flip the slide. I want to just to bring this to a comparison. You'd asked me to share the comparison. You know, what's the difference? And it's not either or. I'm not running away from a contract. It's not a handshake deal, but it's not what's known in the academic world as a complete contract, right? So a complete contract is very formal and rigid, and you write down everything because, Dave, I'm smarter than you, and I'm going to tell you how to, you to be my Sherpa, right? Instead, it's saying, you know what, I don't know everything, and I can't predict the future, right? And so what will happen is sometimes organizations can and do have informal relational contracts, kind of a handshake deal. But lawyers don't like those handshake deals. And they get us in trouble sometimes because we're not always aligned. You know, oh, I thought we said this, but you didn't say this, right? And so what we want to do is something in the middle. So a formal relational contract it's not a complete contract and it's not a handshake deal. It's a flexible contract framework that creates, in the words of a very famous legal scholar, Ian McNeil, it creates an instrument for social cooperation. and keeps the parties in continuous alignment. So when business happens, I'm not going back to the words in the contract. I'm going to the spirit of the relationship and what we said, and I'm leaning on our governance. So having a contract that brings in formal governance, brings in the relational goals, because what we set out to do today may have to change tomorrow when business happens. And I don't want to have our contract fighting with our relationship. I want our contract to be supporting our relationship. And that's really the premise is, how do you go away from this either or and have both?
Yeah, it takes an awful lot of, I think, kind of individual and corporate humility, really to say, hey, you know what? I can't do this alone. I can't climb Everest alone. And not only can I not do it, I can't climb Everest with a Sherpa who just does what I tell them to do, right? It's not just sharing the load, it's sharing the strategy and the process. And I really like the sense of engagement that brings.
Right. And Dave, you can't guarantee you're going to get to the top of Mount Everest because sometimes it snows, right? We live in a dynamic world. Business happens. So it for those more strategic partnerships, it's saying, let's create a contract that's appropriate for these strategic partnerships and not just using and leaning on the same old transactional ways of working. You gave the story about the company when you went in and they use the word transaction. These are deals with lots of zeros behind them sometimes. Yeah. They're not a transaction. They're a relationship. And I've got to get the transaction. I've got to get the contract right to support it. And this is where we were seeing, and what Oliver Hart talks about, shading or lock-in. You don't get the contract right, people don't behave in their best way. And so we want people to lean into these relationships knowing that we don't know everything. And we're going to have to figure it out. So the governance is very formal in these relationships, the goals and objectives, the guiding principles, and the work itself is designed to be flexible. So the work and the money, hey, you've got to do a little bit more work. I've got to give you a little bit more money. It's okay. We're saying sometimes we have to do more work and pay a little bit, the supplier, whoever, the partner deserves a little bit more money. So the governance structure is going to help us align those interests, right? And embrace the change. So what was written may not be the right word that was written. We have to change our contract. Yeah. So I'll give you a really good example of an organization that has a big Mount Everest. So are you familiar with the SKA Observatory, the Square Kilometer Array Observatory?
I am not familiar with that.
So it is a treaty of several countries. I think it's about 16 now. When they started it, every year they get more and more countries that participate in this treaty. But they're coming together. And by the way, the U.S. is not in that treaty, believe it or not. So it's a treaty of these different countries that are coming together to pool resources to create the world's next generation telescope. Because the lenses on a telescope are tapped out. They can only do so much looking at traditional technology. So they use radio frequency technology, sound, in order to see. Okay, so it is really leapfrogging the way we see the universe and the technology that we have. So these countries have come together, and I got a call from an astronomer who was tasked to create contracts with the software suppliers who are going to help them build this telescope. So there's hardware and software, and there's lots of software companies that have little expertise. So think of these as you're climbing your Mount Everest to build the world's next generation telescope. And you have to, by law, by the treaty, use people from different countries and different companies, because that's part of the treaty. Everyone participates. And so now you're like, wow, I've got to climb Mount Everest with all these different software companies. And some of them are universities, and some of them are think tanks, and some of them are private companies. And so they used a formal relational contract to create a framework agreement. So all of the players in the ecosystem have the exact same framework agreement. And then what drops down, every 3 months, they use Agile So every 3 months, they're planning for the next 3 months. Those task orders come down, and then that's what the different parties do to work together. Then they realign. Next 3 months, next 3 months. They're building the world's next generation telescope 3 months at a time as they learn what they're doing. So it's incorporating Agile, but they're all aligned with the same goals and objectives, and they have the same governance structure. They feed in and work. They're really working as an ecosystem.
But the nature of the product, that they're building forces that behavior, because you can't do it in your own country's real estate. You need global real estate scale to be able to pull that off. But I bet if you asked them, they would say, yeah, we have to work with these other 15 countries and organizations just because we're forced into that mode. Really, we would rather have just done it on our own. I mean, don't you think that people have this natural draw to just, I just don't know how deeply I can rely on these other 15. I know what my goals, objectives, process, I know what my stuff is. I just don't know what their stuff is. I'd rather do this on, I'm just forced into a relational agreement.
Yeah. So Dave, this is really good, because if that's the mindset of the organization, you know what I say? Go do it yourself.
Yeah.
You know what? If you think you can do it yourself, go climb your own mountain. So relational contracting is for those who are humble enough and smart enough to know, I can't do this myself. And a traditional contract is going to build these walls that are going to prevent us from the flexibility and prevent us from leaning in. And so this is why, tomorrow everybody just doesn't, wake up one day and I'm doing formal relational contracting. It's an educational process. Law schools have only just now begun to teach these concepts. And they've been debated since the 1960s. Actually, two legal scholars, Ian McNeil and Stuart McCulley, created the idea of relational contract. They named it, and they studied, these deals that were working really well. And they said the best deals, put the contract in the drawer and say, screw the contract. We're going to keep the relationship healthy. But lawyers don't like that, right? And so how do you have this happy medium? So there's been this debate about relational contracting for really since the 1960s. Stuart McCulley's original article on the concept of relational contracting, single most cited article in legal, from if you look at legal works and stuff, it really sparked this debate, but no one knew how to do it. And this is where I think it takes a supply chain person, a practicing attorney, and an economist to kind of play around with this and say, well, how can you have both? It's not either or. It's not put your contract in a drawer and ignore it, or not have a contract at all, but it's not having a contract that's so complete that it puts up these walls and doesn't create good neighbors.
Yeah, it's your formal relational contract.
Exactly.
Is the net result of this.
It's not either or, it's both. So let's show the next slide, Dave, and let's kind of just dig in. I really like comparisons because I think it makes things come to life for folks. So there are 5 dimensions that we look at when we try to compare a transactional contract and a relational contract. And remember, a formal relational contract's not all the way to the relational. It's just, we're still having a contract. So it's more kind of in the middle, right? But let's look at the focus. In a transaction, the focus is the commercial transaction. You even said this, right? Oh, this transaction. You hear, lawyers say, I got to complete this transaction. I got the strategic partnership, and all you just call it a transaction? No, it's not. It's a relationship. So when we're trying to solve more complex things, when we have more interdependence and we need to rely on the others, we have to start putting that relationship first. So you're moving away from simply the contract terms and conditions to the relationship is important, and the contract terms and conditions need to support the relationships, not be something the business people go, put it in the drawer and ignore it, right? Now, let's look at just the philosophy, the behaviors of how we treat that relationship. Is it arm's length, right? Do I come in arm's length, or even worse, with the mindset that it's okay to screw you over? contractually, right? A win-win. I have in one of my books, Microsoft Chief Procurement Officer, he's retired now. He said, Kate, win-win is when we get to win twice, right? And so, yeah, the companies with the most power have the power to win twice, but it doesn't inspire their partners to want to give them the best, right? And we saw this in the pandemic. But I'm named the big company. Yeah, sorry, you're kind of a pain in the ass to do business with, and I only have so much inventory, and I'm going to give it to the people that actually treat me well and pay me well. Like, why would I supply you when you can just terminate me anyway? Like, there's no loyalty there. So we're shifting from this arm's length to the concept that the partnership matters, right? So let's go back to the SKA Observatory. Yeah, no one can do everything. They can't. Even if even if the law of the treaty said you have to do X and you have to do Y, they know it's such a big, hairy, audacious goal to build the world's next generation telescope. It's going to take, they think, 10 years, right? And so how can they come together and say, working together is really the best way that we're going to get here? Everybody has different skills. What's that flexible framework? Now, the third dimension is risk and risk management, right? In a traditional transactional contract, we use the power and enforceability. The clauses are designed to actually, if we can, shift risk, right? So think about, even simple things like payment terms. Oh, I'm a big company. Did I tell you that we had payment terms? The CFO wants us to go from 60 to 90 days or 90 to 120 days. Well, that just shifted the risk of the cost of the capital. But was that the smart thing to do? If I'm the buyer and my cost of capital is cheaper than the suppliers, maybe we should have a discussion, and maybe it should be better for me to hold that risk of cost of capital, because you're just going to up it. You're going to bake that into your price and hide it from me. So now we're looking at risk, and we're putting the risk in the center and saying, how can we actually collaborate to mitigate risk? Instead of shifting risk, let's work together to mitigate risk. So in the contract itself, we would actually like to see a formal risk assessment and understanding an allocation of the risk. You have this, I have this, we have these together. And our governance would obligate us to work together to mitigate the risk. Wow, novel concept, huh?
It's funny. The example I gave you of the board saying someone's going to get screwed as long as we don't. I like the example better of climbing the mountain with the Sherpa, right? I can see somebody just below the peak of Everest, and the snowstorm sets in, and they turn to the Sherpa and say, someone's going to fall off this mountain, and that's okay as long as you're the one doing the falling. Oh, wait, we're tied together. There is that relationship where if somebody fails, you're both going to pay a penalty for that.
Absolutely. And so this is where relational contracts really are designed for the strategic deals where you do have dependence. If you are buying pens, it's perfectly fine to be transactional. I would even argue you don't even need a contract. Just go to Amazon and click a button, right? So the more complex, the more risky, the more dynamic, the more dependent, we need to lean in and lean into a new economy, a new way of working, right? So now, Dave, I'm going to blow your mind. Head's going to explode here for a lot of people on the call.
Bring it on.
Social norms, right? Social norms. So a traditional contract, have you ever seen social norms or guiding principles of behaviors written in a traditional contract?
No, because most people, I think, believe they don't belong in a contract.
Exactly. Like, why do I have actually? So in the US, there is kind of this obligation of good faith, right? But we take that obligation of good faith and we actually put more words around it. So what does good faith mean? Right? So there's 6 guiding principles that we teach. And so those guiding principles, the teams between the buyer and the supplier, we call them a deal architect team, would actually put words around these social norms and guiding principles, and you're explicitly including those in the contract obligations. So when business happens and you're stuck, gosh, how are we going to act and behave, right? So one of those things would be equity. So we had a price, right? But now it snowed on Mount Everest, right? Inflation happened. Well, sorry, I'm not giving you an increase in price because we contracted for the price. Yes, but I'm losing money as a supplier. I don't care. Your problem, right? So what if the supplier then goes out of business? Well, you kind of did care. You were just hoping and shifting that risk. So now in a formal relational contract, ideally, you're very transparent. And so you go, gosh, inflation, it's killing me. I'm no longer making money. Let's go back and actually reevaluate the price that I'm paying, right? And in a vested agreement, you will see one of the rules we have is a pricing model with incentives. We win together, we lose together. But we want to be able to lean on these social norms when we have a difficult decision. What are the social norms that we are going to use, these behaviors, to help us make a fair and equitable decision? Yeah. I can't just screw you because the contract said, sorry, price is the price is the price, and I don't care that you're losing money anymore. Right? Now, the last one is planning. And in a complex world, we can't plan for everything. We never know when it's going to snow on Mount Everest. So a transactional contract tries to write everything down. And in a relational contract, we want to have a framework. We embrace the fact that business is dynamic, right? But it's not, in a informal relational contract, we might not have written anything down. So now it's like we need to write down enough, that framework, so that we can have it and anchor, but we have the flexibility. So it's not either or. It's not a rigid transactional contract, and it's not a handshake deal. Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It makes so much sense. Really, I think the time has come for this. And I can't imagine anybody listening to you talk through this and saying, no, that's a bad idea. I want to go back to the old world. But there's something that stops them from really fully embracing the concept of a relational contract. What do you think stands in the way? And do you have kind of a process that you would say, okay, work through this process and you'll end up in the right spot? What is that?
Well, Dave, it's almost like you knew the next slide was coming and we actually planned this. So absolutely. So what stops people? They don't know how to do it. Right. And so what we've done is really taken the, you go fast to go slow, is walking people through a process. So giving people steps. So gosh, you say this is a strategic relationship. Let's follow a process to get to the contract. So the first step is just to lay the foundation for the partnership. As I mentioned, not all things should have a relational contract, right? If you're buying pens, probably don't need one, right? But when you start to use the words like flexibility, dependency, risk, variability, strategic, investment, those types of words, typically those are your more strategic relationships. So let's slow down in step one and lay the foundation. Talk about trust, talk about transparency, talk about cultural fit. And make sure that we have the right partner, because you don't want to go into a strategic partner with the wrong partner. And so transparency can really build amazing platform for companies to collaborate more. So if indeed collaboration is something you're wanting to and need, how transparent can you be? And do you choose to be? So I'll go back to SKA. We've all these suppliers in different countries, and we're sitting there facilitating the workshop, and we talk about trust. We talk about transparency. So we use a tool called the Transparency Commitment Matrix. What kinds of information should we be sharing to build this telescope in the fastest, most economical, safest way, right? And everybody sits around and goes, oh, well, we could use this, and this is great, and this is great. Well, do you do this today? Do you share today? No. Well, should you share? Yes. And it makes people stop and think that the more we create trusting relationships, the more we create and build transparency, the more we purposely try to build and have good cultural fit with our partners, the better these relationships are going to be. So before you ever put negotiate one thing in your contract, lay the foundation. Lay the foundation. A good tool that we use is called the compatibility and trust assessment. Put the trust elephant in the room and score your level of trust, and then say, all right, well, we need to improve it. So the second step is co-creating the shared vision and objectives. What's your Mount Everest? Or maybe what's your bunny hill? You don't have to be climbing Mount Everest, but what is it we're trying to do together? Then adopting the guiding principles. Those are those social norms I talked about. And notice that I haven't negotiated anything yet specifically to the commercials. These first 3 steps are about negotiating the relationship, right? You're a good partner for me. Here's a Mount Everest and some objectives that we agree to do. Here are the guiding principles. So now that I've negotiated the heart and soul of the partnership, step 4 is where we actually start to put pen to paper and negotiating the commercial terms. Our termination clause has to support the nature of the contract, right? Our IP clauses. If I'm the big buyer with all the power and I write a contract that says everything's work for hire and I own every ounce of IP, you're going to alienate maybe some Sherpas who could help you. Right? So is there a way that you could do licensing? One of my favorite tools when thinking about IP is, what if the supplier owns the IP instead of the buyer? But there's a $0 license for the buyer, so that if the supplier leaves and exits the relationship, the buyer's never hurt. They get to continue to use that IP on their deal, but they can't sell it. They can't go and sell it to somebody else, but they get to use it, so they're not hurt. So is there ways that we can rethink some of these contract clauses? Instead of a termination for convenience, what should be the right termination and exit plans that we have, right? The economics, the different things. So these contracts are real contracts. They have all the same headers that a traditional contract was, but the words underneath them are aligned to the intent. Now, the last step is staying aligned, and this is the governance structure. In the contracts that we see and teach, often there's more words in the governance schedule than there is in the statement of work. How we maintain this relationship is more than me telling you how to do the work. So it is a contract. It literally has all the same things, but it's putting that relationship first.
Yeah. It feels to me like this has to come from the top down in an organization. You have to have senior leadership really bought into building this kind of relationship with the partners, in your ecosystem. And the thing that I worry about sometimes is at that level, there tends to be this overarching focus on bottom line. Yeah, Dave, I'm willing to talk through this new type of contract with my partners as long as it's going to increase my bottom line, because that's really what matters. I mean, is this something that requires senior leadership buy-in? How do you get that? What do you offer people to kind of get them on board?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. So we have seen people that are more in the middle that are stuck, right? So they're very stuck in what they're doing. A great example, one of our case studies is Intel and DHL. They were stuck in Costa Rica and they needed to change the way they work. So Intel didn't change all of their contracts, but they did approach how they worked with DHL in Costa Rica differently. Right. And so a lot of times people are adopting this in areas where they are stuck. Dave, I need you. I am stuck with you. We're dependent and it's not working. So I'm willing to pilot and do something different.
Mm.
So the vast majority of deals that we see that are organizations that are leaning into this are starting with a pilot. They're not just going, oh, we're going to change all of our, contracts to relational contracts. As I say, change the world one deal at a time, one relationship at a time. So take one where you're stuck. In the HBR article, for example, we profile Dell and Genco, but one of my favorite case studies is the Canadian government, Island Health, and their doctors, and how they said, this adversarial us versus them contract is not working for us. Mm-hmm. And they used this exact same process, and they went from, this is stunning. Remember we talked about and lay the foundation, trust and transparency, relationship health. Before they started, and we call it flip, so you're taking an existing relationship and restructuring it to a relational contract. When they started, we measured their relational health with the compatibility and trust assessment. 86% of the adjectives that people used to describe that relationship were negative. Distrustful, opaque, toxic, bullying.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They were so frustrated that they wouldn't even talk to each other. Only the lawyers could talk to each other. Right? And you take the same people, the same scope of work, you run them through this process. And in 18 months later, their new contract has put the relationship first, 85% positive adjectives, collaborative, trusting, transparent. It's amazing.
Big swing.
So the before and afters on these relationships. So, my advice isn't, don't go out and just go, oh, we're changing our policy and all our contracts. Well, no, you've got lots of suppliers. You've got lots of customers. Change the world one relationship at a time and pick one to pilot. Yeah. Where maybe do you think if you leaned into that partner and treated that partner as a SERPA, that you might be able to get better results?
Yeah. I want to put I really want to put your Harvard Business Review article on our LinkedIn, Impartner's LinkedIn page for people to read. I wonder if I'm allowed to do that. I'll work on getting that done.
You can. If you do the hard copy for them to download, they're going to charge you a click. But the nice thing is the link, you can actually read it digitally for free.
Perfect. That's what we'll do. Hey, oh my gosh, I could go for another hour. I get so much enlightenment from this. I absolutely love it. I don't know if we've left enough time for people to ask questions. If there is something urgent, please drop it in the chat. But I'd love it if you could kind of wrap up just with kind of what you think people should do. What do you want? What's the right next step for somebody in the audience to take? If I'm going to drop off this seminar with you and go try and start down this path, what's the right first step?
Well, I think it's to begin to just be curious and start to learn. And so I know a few people on here want books, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I realize lots of people don't like to read books. But you know what? I think most people read a 4,000 word HBR article. Yeah. So we can get you the link, put the HBR article up there for them to go through. It's a free read if you do the digital version, and just be curious. And then if it seems like it might be something you're interested in, read the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the book is going to put the HBR article on steroids. It goes into the details of each of the steps, and we use in the book the case study of Island Health, and it really comes to life. And so be curious, and then take the HBR article or some of our other work. We have a white paper, different things. All of our white papers are open source, and begin to share that within your organization. Because we find that change doesn't happen when one person wants to make a change, unless they're the boss, unless they're like the top guy, right? But you can have someone in the middle of an organization, which is exactly what Dell did. Darren Browder at Dell, he wasn't an executive. He was a procurement manager. He said, we got to change the way we're working with this supplier, with this particular partner. It's just not working. And there's this crazy research out of the University of Tennessee. And by the way, that Dell's in Austin, Texas. And they're like, I'm going to lean into that other UT and be a little bit curious. They sent some folks to our class, and began to learn. And they said, you know what, we do need to change this relationship. It's not working. And a relational contract allows us to create that flexibility that we need to lean in and create a better environment in how we work.
And the book, once again, amazing book. I've gone through it, Contracting in the New Economy. Again, we have copies of this for the first 10 people that registered for this. I wish I had more to spread them because there were a lot of people that were interested in it, but first 10 people got this. And we'll do this again next time, but this time we'll do it with Vested. So Kate Vitasek, University of Tennessee, author and founder of the Vested programs. It's always great to chat with you. I really appreciate the time. If people have questions or want to drive a deeper engagement with you, there's the contact information right there. Anyone interested in working with Impartner, you can find us on our LinkedIn page. We'd love to talk to you. Any final thoughts?
Be curious. And what got you here is not going to get you there in the future. So, we live in a new economy. So maybe it's just time to rethink some of our contracts, maybe.
Love it.
And reach out if you have questions. So you've got my email out there. I don't bite. I do answer my emails. So if you've got something that's running through your mind, go ahead. Don't be afraid to shoot me an email. I will reply to that.
Happy holidays to everybody. You've got a new year coming up. What better way to kick off a brand new year than a brand new philosophy around partnering? So we strongly encourage people to work on this, be smarter in your partnering. And we will try and do the same. So happy holidays to everybody. And Kate, thanks again so much for your time.
Awesome.
All right.